Good morning, everyone. We are live. Thanks again for joining us on Nutanix at 9. This is our third session of the series. My name is Dan Drude, and I will be hosting for today. Looking forward to digging into VDI with some of our panel experts and answering your questions. So again, thanks to those of you that joined us for our third session here on the Nutanix at 9 series. We'll kind of walk through today following the same format we've had for the last few sessions. So I'll take you through kind of what we're doing today. We'll do some quick introductions, both of our panel guests, Mike and Ed. We've got some updates around the Nutanix platform and Nutanix in general. We've got a number of questions to get through today, so that'll be the bulk of our presentation. And then at around 9:30, we'll stop with a quick outro on how you can get some more info if needed and how we'll follow up. But we'll certainly keep going after 9:30 in the event that there's additional questions, or we find that we're kind of covering some topics that popped up today. So once again, looking forward to kind of hit all these items today and making sure that you get as much as you can on Nutanix and VDI. So let's go ahead and get started on some introductions here. From the Egroup side, he's joined us before. This is Mike Dent. He's been with Egroup for about 8 years. He is one of our Nutanix technology champions, and we'll be helping answer a lot of these questions from the perspective of our customers, right? And doing the delivery and what they've been doing in the field, how we've helped them get there. We'll be bringing a lot of experience there. But also joining Mike from the Nutanix side is our expert, Ed Kuiper, from the kind of the cloud platform side of things. So Ed's gotten extensive experience on both kind of the business leadership side of things, as well as IT architecture and solution design. And so we'll really be looking to leverage his experience at Nutanix, working with the VDI solutions that Nutanix has, and getting that feedback directly from them today. So Mike and Ed, thank you both for joining. Looking forward to kind of tapping into your knowledge here and understanding what what we can uncover for the people on the session today. So thanks again for you two to join here. For those of you that maybe haven't heard of Egroup yet, or this is your first time really checking us out, I'll give you kind of the quick 30-second run through. Egroup is a 20-plus-year-old company. We're headquartered out of Charleston, South Carolina. We've got people from Florida up to Pennsylvania, but most of our staff is based out of Charleston, South Carolina. As I said, we've been around for about 20 years, debt-free, privately owned the entire time. It really lets us kind of define our portfolio and the way that we navigate the path forward for our customers. As far as who we work with, if you are a group that deals with compliance, if you've got strict requirements from yourself, from management, from your customers, or around your solutions, we tend to fit well with your goals. We have a very strong program with a lot of attention to detail and making sure that our solutions accelerate your objectives. So any questions on Egroup, please feel free to throw them in as well. But again, we're really looking forward to digging into what we're doing on the Nutanix side today specifically. So jumping from the intros here, we'll kind of hit a few updates, if you will, from the Nutanix side, and then we'll kind of get into it with Mike and Ed. On the healthcare side of things, Nutanix's solution has been pretty well vetted across different applications that those of you in healthcare know are kind of standard that you have to have in order to be considered a viable solution. So for those of you paying attention from the healthcare side, Nutanix did partner with GE to get more certifications. This one specifically around Centricity PACS systems, and then also the Centricity Clinical Archive. So these are new verified solutions. I know that that's a big thing when it comes to building these solutions and putting them on a platform. So I thought that was worth mentioning for those of you in the healthcare industry. Another thing to note is for the second year in a row, right, the XiBeam multi-cloud cost management solution, that has hit SOC certifications in various tiers. So again, for those of you that are taking a look at how to manage multi-cloud and deal with cost and security compliance, definitely take a look at that XiBeam product. It's going to hit your security requirements if you're looking to fit the SOC requirements, and also give you some insight into what you're doing beyond just Nutanix Core. In this update here, a little bit later, I think this was back in February or so, but for those of you that maybe aren't on AOS 5.19 quite yet, few features to check out. You've got your multi-site replication with XiLeap, the disaster recovery tool. There are more ways to report on storage. So for those of you looking for more robust reporting, that's been increased with AOS 5.19. and then also the native key manager for robo clusters that's been integrated as well. So that's something that for those of you with a lot of different locations, that's going to help just with that key management a little bit easier there. Mike or Ed, any comments on kind of the Nutanix news before we jump into the Q&A today?
No, the only one I'd jump out with, Dan, is the AOS 519. That still is one of their short-term releases. So for customers that typically are staying on the long-term tracks for longer-term support or less upgrades, we're still on 515 for the long-term support. 519 will be a little bit more cutting edge. We're seeing customers go there that need the specific features in those releases. Definitely not a beta release at all, right? It's a GA release, fully supported in production. But I'd say for the most of our customer base that we deal with, at least at Egroup, we're trending towards most of them staying on the LTS release cycle. But love seeing the 519 releases. Just some of the right-click functionality coming within Prism and some of the later releases. It's something as simple as a right-click on an object is awesome to see.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a good point on that. But yeah, Ed, anything from your side, or are we ready to jump into it?
We having some audio issues there.
You might be on mute, Ed.
How's that, better?
There you are.
There we go. Okay, double muted. I apologize. No, from a Prism Central standpoint, there is also a Prism Central update that goes along with that, so you want to check that out and check out the release notes. But from an AOS standpoint, constantly doing improvement there around performance. So check out the release notes around performance increases with the op log and everything else.
Yeah, awesome, cool, good to know. Thanks, Ed. So yeah, let's now that we're kind of past the breaking news, if you will, let's jump into the questions and answers. We'll bring the answers to the questions. So I guess kind of starting out with one of the ones that we probably run into more often. Thank you to those of you that submitted stuff around Horizon View. I know that there's generally a misconception for groups that maybe take a surface level dig at Nutanix and Nutanix has its own hypervisor, it's got to go all that. But one of the questions that we had was, can VMware's Horizon View solution run on Nutanix?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Obviously, if you're running View, Horizon View, it's going to be on ESX, which runs on Nutanix, and it really goes back to the roots of Nutanix. When we went to market in 2011, we were considered that VDI in a box, and we only supported ESX at that time. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, we still today have many customers running Horizon on Nutanix, including a couple of my own customers.
Yeah, and I think that's the spot on. Ed is kind of the what was the message I think from .next 2 years ago or so. The freedom of choice. It really speaks to everything that Nutanix does. Is it really gives you that flexibility, right? If you want to run, if you are currently a Horizon View customer, I've had this conversation with several customers. Right, we're Horizon View today. I can't move to Nutanix. Well, that's not true, right? It's around that discussion of, yeah, we can run VMware, we can run View, and we can run it very well and at very large scale. No limitations there at all. It's that freedom, whichever way you want to go.
And just to add, if the next question really is what is the value then? Like, why would we run Horizon on Nutanix? Mm-hmm. And so you really have to go back, look at Nutanix and the platform. It's scalable, right? You have that linear scale, so you know exactly how many users per host you're going to get. And in addition, it's got that built-in DR, right? The data protection disaster recovery is built in. So yes, we can run it, but really you have to start thinking about what is the true value and why are customers doing it. And it's around that linear scale. It's around the performance and the built-in capabilities around DR.
Yeah, and I think one other add there is with View, right? As we see people kind of adopting, DEM, the user was it was DEM, now I think it's UEM or whatever, whichever way they flip now. When needing some file shares, right? It turned into somewhat of a hard environment to build out, right? You've got your VMs, you've got to figure out where you're going to put your user profile data, your UEM data on the file shares. Now we can do that all consolidated right within that Nutanix platform with the hypervisor and files, and seeing that performance, seeing a better performance response as well, keeping everything locally within that cluster as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Very cool. It sounds like, I guess, no real blockers or anything, and honestly, the design of Nutanix would probably be beneficial to a view environment. What's the, say somebody's running 3-tier today, they've got, an all-flash array and some servers for their VDI environment running VMware. Is that the same as if you were migrating like production VMware to Nutanix, where there's nothing really more to it other than, a quick migration over to new infrastructure? What's anything that people should be mindful of moving from like a 3-tier VDI platform to VDI on Nutanix?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and you got to take a couple approaches, right? One is, if they're 3-tier running Horizon, moving to Horizon on Nutanix, it's just that vStorage motion, right? You're just there's no difference. What you are gaining in value, as Mike said, is that the files being integrated into that solution. So whether it be for your persona, your app layering, for user files, you got your data protection, disaster recovery. But in addition, like, what are some of the other differentiators? You're going to get things like shadow cloning, right? So with 3-tier architecture, you don't have that. But when you bring that over to Nutanix, you have shadow clone. So what that means is that as users start hitting the same blocks of data, we're gonna take those blocks and cache that across every host, and that gives you what's called data locality, right? So a better performance, but also when we talk about linear scale, adding users, but it's also kind of that scale at being consistent with performance across 100, 300, 500, 1,000 users and greater, because we have those capabilities. Now, if you flip and say, okay, well, we're at Horizon and we're going to migrate to another broker, whether it be a Citrix or Frame, what does that look like? Well, Nutanix has those capabilities. I mean, we can do cross hypervisor replication, so you can have an ESX cluster and an AHV cluster, and basically migrate those over if you're going to switch hypervisors. If you're staying on ESX and you're going with Citrix, again, it's that ease of migration. But then we also have Move, right, which is a whole nother tool that Nutanix provides customers to be able to take workloads from traditional 3-tier or anything ESX and bring that into AHV. So we have thought through it, and again, it's that whole thought process of flexibility. I don't think Nutanix is ever saying that, hey, we want everything to be in our ecosystem. We're saying that, hey, we want to provide that for you, and there's some value and benefit. But at the end of the day, it's the customer's choice. We want the customer to have the best experience using the tools and the products that they enjoy the most.
Yeah, Ed, you touched on the shadow clones, right? I think that's kind of as we compare, and I think, Dan, we've got this in a couple slides, as we compare kind of that 3-tier architecture to what Nutanix provides, right? I think shadow clones is easily one of the best kind of response functions for really giving you the best performance when it comes to, whether it's linked clones, instant clones, MCS, PBS, whatever we're talking about, right? It's built in, and we don't get that on a 3-tier architecture, right out of the box, right? We've got that built in, and again, regardless of hypervisor, whether it is View or Citrix on VMware, or whether it's Citrix or Frame on AHV, right? I mean, we that function is built into the underlying infrastructure that we don't have to pick and choose. We can cross any broker that we want, and we still get that functionality.
Awesome. Yeah, and I actually had a few questions come in too from the audience. Thank you again to those of you throwing stuff into the Q&A here. There's a few that I'll kind of table towards the end, since they're not directly tied to the VDI conversation, but we'll definitely get to those questions on Azure and GCP. So hear you there, and thanks for submitting that. But some questions specifically on VDI. Can you run Nutanix's VDI solution in a dark site, no internet? It sounds like we got some feds on the line. What's the story there?
So in that regard, are we talking about Frame?
Yeah, that's what I inferred as.
Yeah.
So Frame today cannot be run in a dark site because it is desktop as a service. The broker is going to be up and managed as a service in the public cloud. So today it is not. We don't have that. Is it roadmap? That's a good question. It depends on what day we ask. I know there is a lot of Fed out there that has they have requested it. So that's something to kind of stay tuned and see what we're going to do there. there's no definitive answer just yet. I really think it comes down to the customer requirements and the need out there for it. It would be nice to see though, but it does also take away from the true simplicity of Frame and not having to manage the broker infrastructure.
Okay, makes sense. No, well good question, and appreciate the answer there. And this question here might be a bit specific, where our answer will be, it depends, right? But what if we're running VDI on Nutanix? Is there a ratio vCPU to core? Is that something that we can pin down today, or is that more of a mileage may vary?
Mileage may vary, but it's an awesome question, because really when you're sizing it always comes up, right? Because you want to get the highest density. What I'll say to that is you can look at that. It could be 4-to-1, it could be 12-to-1. It really depends on what you're running and what the expectation is. But I would say that with the latest procs, you're getting anywhere from 100 to 125 users per host. Is really the sweet spot. You can go higher, and if there's vGPU, you could go lower. But I started looking at it at the per user host, the user per host density first, and then really, if you want to get into the ratio, if you have an existing VDI environment, we can really knock that out of the park and figure out what it's going to be. Without any of that data, it's more or less understanding the applications and really not making it's an educated guess, but there's still a guess there, right? And a lot of it comes out in the wash with the POC.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Nothing to add there. I think that's just spot on. I mean, I think we've got some decent tools out in the market that help us kind of define that as well. With Liquidware and their Stratosphere test. I mean, some stuff that gives us a decent idea of where we think we're landing, but it's still ultimately, I think it's somewhat of a loaded question, because it's all going to be dependent on, your mileage may vary and what works this week. You do one little application upgrade and all of a sudden you start to see things go left or right, depending on what you're doing, right? So it's easy to think we're going to get there, but I think at the same time, it's a pretty specific science of trying to get down to that ratio if we need to get there.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So I think to sum it up, yes, Horizon View can run on Nutanix. Cool. No, sure. Thanks, guys. Let's jump into the next one here, and I definitely think we touched on some of the other solutions or questions that we'll be running into, but we mentioned Frame with regards to not being ready for a dark site, and there is a follow-on question that maybe we tap into here, or maybe that's offline, because it sounds a bit more of an architecture type thing. But I mean, Nutanix Frame, is that a full VDI solution? Is that directly comparable to like a Citrix or a VMware VDI solution?
So you've got a transparent person on the phone here on this call. So I grew up with Citrix, right? So I used to manage over 5,000 Citrix users, and Frame is great, but Frame is a new way of thinking, right? It's browser first, so it's HTML5 first for the interface. We do have clients, so Windows and Mac clients, but again, it is really HTML5 first, and it is fully brokered in the cloud, right? So it is a different mindset. What it can deliver is the same end user experience, just a little bit differently. So my real, if I talk about advice to customers, if they're using Citrix, then they're probably most likely going to continue on with Citrix if they want that on-prem infrastructure for the brokering. But if they're really looking to modernize their VDI deployment or their end user computing deployment, then it's definitely worth looking at Frame because of the simple approach, right? It really is a new architecture that allows for quick delivery across multi-cloud, including on-prem. And it does it in a way that really is, I don't like to use the word superior, but it is, it's the most modern approach to delivering desktops to the end user.
I think that's a great way to put it. I wouldn't, superior is a tough word to use there, but I think it's definitely simpler. It's definitely faster from start to finish. I mean, from zero to desktops, we can do Frame I'd say maybe a quarter or less the time of some of the other ones. And I think, Dan, we did a webinar on that a couple months ago. I think you know, frame zero to desktops in 5 minutes with frame, something like that, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I think that's truly the story is the benefits of nothing to something with frame are trending towards, you know, being a lot simpler and faster than the other brokers at this point in time. Even Citrix Cloud, right, where I don't have to stand up a lot of management interfaces on-prem, there's still a decent amount of work I've got to do on the Citrix side to get Citrix Cloud ready to go. You know, so even from a POC perspective, Frame is a much simpler kind of start to finish.
Okay. Would you say that there's, you know, a specific profile that indicates, hey, this is Frame versus not? I know that there's some really cool stories of Frame. You know, there's a big school district here locally that has it for like their higher end technology oriented like junior, senior level classes, and they've got AutoCAD and a few other high end apps just kind of loaded, and these desktops spin up really, you know, when they're in class. So rather than buying everybody, you know, like a $3,000 Alienware rig, they've got instances of Frame.
Right.
You know, beyond that, what are some other use cases for Frame that you guys can talk on?
I mean, that's a great use case. Really, normally we have a discovery process, right? We talk to the customer about, you know, here's a list, what's important, and there's check boxes, and then based off of that, we can decide kind of which is a better fit, whether it's going to be a Citrix type VDI solution or Frame. So it really is a matter of if we can't check a box, then we know we steer them the right way. The great thing is that Nutanix is built for EUC, right? It's built for all workloads, but EUC in general works great on Nutanix. So from my perspective, it doesn't make sense to really position Frame if Citrix or Horizon is a better fit, right? They all will run well on Nutanix. But you know, a showstopper is if the customer says, "Hey, we don't want anything in the cloud. We don't want cloud broker model." Then that goes away. If they say, "Hey, we want perpetual licenses," okay, Frame is not a fit because it's subscription. So there are some hard, you know, stop signs that say, "Okay, Frame isn't right," but in general, most use cases are Frame fit. It supports vGPU, it supports multi-cloud, it supports on-prem for the sessions. You know, there are some kind of fear, uncertainty, and doubt FUD around that. Well, we don't support you know, clients. Well, we have GA, Windows, and Mac now for clients, so we have peripheral use. So we are continuing to evolve and develop Frame to become more parallel, but there will always be some slight differences.
Yeah, and Ed, to circle up on some of these questions that we've had pop in, especially around kind of the dark side, and you had touched on, you know, maybe cloud averse, right? You know, customers that how as you guys go through this process, what's your kind of talk track, or how do you convince customers that, you know, we're not going to expose our on-prem environment when we go to Frame, right? You know, I've got my proxies, right? And the Frame console is talking to my proxies. How do you convince them and give them some confidence that we're not exposing our internal goods, you know, out based on, you know, from that connectivity?
I mean, there is an SSL cert that's positioned in there, right? So there is that layer of security, you know. But the same question can be asked for any broker model, whether it be what Horizon's doing or Citrix is doing. So it's a great question, and I don't want to just kind of ignore it, but I think it's a question that we probably would want to get our security team on the Frame side involved in. So if it's something that you do have concerns with, you know, we probably want to dig deeper into that with somebody who could speak more clearly to it. But you know, SSL certs are a requirement for that brokering. It is a call back to Frame rather than Frame calling you. So there are some there's definitely security built into that.
Yeah, I think that you touched on that. I was hoping you were going to touch on that last piece, was the call back and that call in. I mean, I think that's right. When we look at kind of how we can make sure there is a little bit of confidence in securing our perimeter, it's for things that are doing callbacks as opposed to Frame calling into these solutions.
Correct.
Cool. Yeah, and Mike, thanks for hitting on some of those questions there in the chat, and thanks to those of you that submitted that. Good questions here. Let's move on to the next question here. So this one came in. I like this one because it sounded like it was pretty specific to a use case, and we have kind of touched on that a little bit. But I think we see this circumstance with a lot of these companies that are starting to team up, to merge together, right? Or maybe some groups have been acquired, but kind of figuring out whose pasture do we move into, right?
Yep.
So the scenario as it reads, right? Somebody's using VMware for their VDI environment, and they're looking at Nutanix with Citrix. So I think this will actually answer a question that we had in the chat too, right? Can you run Zen on top of Nutanix? But I guess what are the thoughts around, you've got VMware, you've got the potential to go Nutanix and Citrix. Is there a lot of effort involved in merging those two environments? What can you guys provide around that?
Yeah, so I'll touch on Citrix Zen. So we do have a very small percentage of customers that are running Citrix Zen server on top of Nutanix. The reason why it's so small is because most customers, they change over, they move towards AHV because it's a much more mature hypervisor, and we do support all the feature sets that are needed for Citrix. You know, vGPU is one of the big ones why customers were choosing Citrix Zen server, but AHV supports that, and it has supported it for a while now. But moving past that, you know, if you're moving to Citrix and you're looking to reduce costs, you know, obviously you would run AHV, and then being able to migrate from, you know, Horizon on ESX over to Citrix on AHV. Again, we would use the move, where if you're running, you know, link clones or, you know, MCS, whatever it might be, we could just use move to bring those golden images over. For persistent desktops, again, we could use move to bring them over as well. Right. So I'm not saying it's done, you know, with a click of a button, because you do have to migrate them over, spin them up, but it is a lot simpler than ever, and customers are able to, you know, go to, you know, A to Z fairly quickly, and we do have a lot of success stories with customers doing this.
Yeah, I'd say for the most part, we don't, you know, for the ones we've done this, where either it's a move from another environment into Nutanix, or even something like this topic where we've got kind of a sister organizations. A lot of times we're not moving the VMs, we're just going to redeploy, right? You know, just spin up desktop image and just point it over there, and we're done, right? And we can run them both in parallel until that point in time. So the simplicity's there. I mean, you know, most of these brokers are giving you the option to point to either different clusters or different sources. You know, Citrix, for example, I can have some desktops that live on a VMware environment, some that live in AHV, some that live in the cloud, you know, and so forth. Again, with the simple, you know, few clicks, I can now have those same images deployed over to another cluster or another instance somewhere else. So that simplicity is there.
And I just want to you know, put a plug in for clusters. The ability to scale your on-prem VDI environment up into AWS and run clusters in AWS. You know, there's some great videos out there that we're allowing customers just to burst to any cloud, really, and that's really the vision that we have. This multi-cloud, any cloud, your choice.
Awesome. Yeah, I think clusters is definitely something we'll be scheduling down the road for a dedicated session.
Yep.
And that kind of answers one of the questions that we had, right? Well, if Nutanix provides the cloud for hosted workloads. So I mean, there again is that flexibility, and you know, AWS I think is the most mature of the public cloud offerings that you guys have. But Azure is on the roadmap in the near term for being able to leverage clusters, and then GCP at some point, right? But I think really the multi-cloud flexibility is definitely there with Nutanix, starting with like the automation that you all can do with like Calm into apps. But now I think even just like running workloads and monitoring workloads, that's a big thing there as well.
And don't forget Xi, DR as a service, being able to leverage Xi for your DR plane for VDI. Is really awesome.
Yeah. So Nutanix provides its own cloud in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I think this goes to this question. You know, can Nutanix provide cloud for customers to host their workloads, or they need to use Azure, AWS. I think it's, and Ed, maybe kind of to get you to kind of chime in on this. Yeah, if I'm a customer, I can point my workloads to, clusters in AWS. With Frame, I can point it to AWS, Azure, GCP, and so forth. But what about like Frame credits? What about if I don't, say I'm a customer that I want to go into Frame and I don't have a current AWS or Azure environment, that we've never gone there, right? What can Frame do for me in that case?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can purchase those credits through Nutanix, right? So Nutanix has AWS, Azure, and GCP credits. So that's just something, if you don't want to maintain that responsibility, you can add that into your subscription, even down to Microsoft licensing, right? So all of that can be available. It's not the standard. Most customers are bringing their own, right. But if you don't have that, you don't need to worry about it. We can handle it all for you.
Yeah, like if I'm a customer, I just need 10 desktops, right? For a very specific use case. I don't want to have to worry about my own Azure or AWS environment or anything that goes with it. I just want to push a button and have desktops available for my users. Yeah. Frame credits is the perfect use there.
Exactly. Cool. Exactly.
So I'm gonna pause real quick for those of you that have attended and need to drop because we've hit the half-hour mark. I'm gonna throw some info real quick on the screen before we get back into it. If you need more information, be on the lookout for Leanne. She works with Egroup. She's our business development specialist. She'll be following up to get your feedback. If there are topics that you want to see next, if you have additional questions, if you want to get some time to kind of dig into some stuff, keep an eye out for Leanne's outreach. You can also check out our website. If you go to our data center optimization page, you'll see a contact us form. You can jump in there. Feel free also to leave us a note in the Q&A. Hey, can you reach out to me? We'll exchange info here. But I did want to pause real quick for those of you that do have to drop. Thanks for attending. And as I said, please be on the lookout for Leanne if you can share any feedback. We definitely would appreciate it. But let's we've got a few more questions to hop through, and the chat's been pretty lively. So let's jump back into it. So we've tackled on whether Frame's a full VDI solution. We talked on that. Talked about Tale of Two Cities in the VDI world. I guess in this one, I think a lot of people could debate on this, right? What's different from going Nutanix versus, let me get an all flash array and some servers and just, boost the SSD performance, right? Like, what's the difference? And I think there's probably a few themes we can touch on for this, like management and maybe support experience, those kind of things. But in your experiences, Mike and Ed, what are the big differentiators for you all, when it comes to 3-tier versus HCI for VDI?
I mean, the first thing I'll say is, do a TCO ROI, and you'll find that long-term Nutanix is going to be financially a better solution. But then when you look at the technology alone, bringing everything into a consolidated platform that handles not just your compute, but your storage. It has data protection built in. If you're running Citrix and on HV, being able to wrap microseg easily around that. Right. Things like the data locality and the shadow cloning. If you're running Citrix, our integration in for machine provisioning with MCS, being able to provision desktops thousands at a time using redirect on write. So really simplified management, everything under a single pane of glass. So there are so many reasons why you would want to move away from 3-tier for VDI over to a Nutanix platform. And I always say it's VDI in a box. So if you are a small operation and you're trying to do more with less, it makes sense. If you're a large operation and you have multi-departments, it makes sense. It's bringing VDI into the VDI team, right? So they're not worrying about the networking and the storage and the compute and then the virtualization. It brings everything together. And then, as Mike noted earlier, even files, right? So it is a true all-encompassing solution for end user computing or VDI.
Yeah, two things there. I love the microseg, right? I mean, that's a simple topic that I think it's kind of lost in translation a lot of times, right? Is we're inside our four walls, right? I'm not going to worry about this at this point in time. But really, that's not true, right? With as we can see with how much ransomware, that doesn't care. It doesn't care where you are, right? So having that ability to at the push of a button, and this is what I love about Nutanix with AHV and whether it's Frame, whether it's Citrix, is I can now wrap microseg around any of those, right? I can have that up and going within minutes, and securing that environment with minimal effort, right? If I look at kind of what it takes for us to do NSX, right? NSX is, you know, there's a lot of moving parts to deploy. There's a lot of things that have to be put in place to really get a successful NSX implementation for microsegmentation off the ground. With Flow and microseg with AHV, I mean, it's literally a checkbox. Enable it. We start monitoring and we put in the policies, right? So it's, and to your point, Ed, it's all within the same pane of glass. I'm managing my servers, VMs, desktops, microseg, backup, you know, replication, all within that same pane of glass. So you know, when you say VDI in a box, I mean, it's really infrastructure in a box, I guess, at that point in time, because everything gets wrapped around it. And anytime I hear VDI in a box, I think back to Citrix's VDI in a box product that I think lasted like 2 years. But you know, hey, VDI in a box, it was like, okay. But no, I mean, the key point there is everything stays, you know, I'm not having to deploy another appliance, right? Once I get this stuff going, it's all built right in, and I never have to leave.
And linear scale. So if you're adding users, you're just adding node by node by node. And the nodes can be mixed. I mean, you might have a processor generation change. It doesn't matter. You may have different type of disk. It doesn't matter. If you go heavy on files and you need storage only nodes, you can move those right into that same cluster. So there's so many benefits. And just go back to AOS 519. There's a new feature specifically for VDI, which is identity-based network policies around Flow. So being able to create your Flow or microseg policies based off of user category or username tied in with Active Directory. So it really does simplify that microseg deployment and management.
Right. Absolutely.
Very cool. That's yeah. I mean, it sounds like kind of a no-brainer, but I think we've probably all run into some extreme fringe cases, right, where maybe the TCO doesn't pan out, and that, you know, I think that's something that in our experience at Egroup, right, it's pretty easy to uncover with Nutanix, right, and you know there are other options out there, but in terms of just kind of, a lot of people think Nutanix even is just VDI when that was more kind of one of the original use cases, but it's you know, you're kind of just carving out chunks of cloud, right, and adding as needed. So I think that benefit there that you guys touched on is worth noting. Let's hop in. I think we got one more or two questions here. And this might, I think we've covered this a good bit, right? And this sounds kind of like a frame type question, right? I guess, what's the main difference between the Nutanix VDI offering and what people are seeing with Nutanix Desktop as a Service?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is confusing because we also get, what is the difference between EUC and VDI, right? And at the end of the day, Desktop as a Service is when the broker is done in the cloud, right? It's not on-prem infrastructure. So where Nutanix VDI is going to be, anything EUC, end user compute, on Nutanix, right? So Desktop as a Service equals Frame, brokers in the cloud. And Citrix also has their Desktop as a Service, which Nutanix does tie into. So you could also do Citrix Desktop as a Service on Nutanix because we have that native integration. But VDI is generally the term when the broker is on-prem on your own infrastructure.
Yeah. Cool. Makes sense. So that wraps up for the formal questions that we had prior to the event. I know we had a few more, looks like comments and questions. Mike, did you want to talk at all about the question on Frame on Nutanix versus, any of the cloud providers?
Yeah, I think that was an interesting one. And I think we kind of briefly touched on this earlier when we were kind of going over it. What's the difference between Frame on Nutanix's instant or, Frame credits versus AWS Azure, providing there? And I think, Ed, feel free to kind of chime in there, but I think really the biggest difference is when I'm running Frame in my tenant, I've got control over my tenant. I can add workloads there. I can do whatever I want within my tenant. If I'm using Frame credits, I just get Frame. I don't get, I'm not getting exposure to AWS or Azure or wherever, Frame is running. and I can't add workloads there. I can't, site-to-site VPN or do anything like that. I'm very limited in scope as to what I get from the frame credit side.
Yeah, and the only other thing is cost. I mean, if you have a large presence within that cloud provider, your pricing may be better than the pricing you're going to get from us, and we want you to be able to take advantage of that. There's another question here that said, is it available or possible to make a frame blueprint on Calm? So the answer is yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just coming out of our most recent Global Tech Summit, we were able to take Calm blueprints and use them in end user compute scenarios. So 100% definitely capable of doing that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great comment on Calm there and being able to integrate that. So I appreciate that submission there. It looks like we got one more popping in.
We're popping in. Let's see. Minimum bandwidth to access frame VDI. I think that's kind of another loaded question as well, right? I mean, it's we're not talking a huge amount of bandwidth. I mean, it's I think, Ed, you probably have the exact kind of average rate.
Yeah. So, and really, it's here's the unique thing about Frame. So when you're in your Frame desktop, you actually have a bandwidth a bar.
Right.
With every user will see it. Just like on your cell phone, you know how much bandwidth you have. So if you're getting bad reception, well, how many bars do you have? Frame gives you that same experience. And it's really cool because you can look and say, oh, I'm having a really bad issue with latency, or it's choppy, or it's just not working. And you can say, oh, that's why I have a bad connection. And it gives you the opportunity to really fix that without putting in that extra support ticket, just saying I'm having a bad experience. And then support has to figure out, well, do you have a bad connection? We provide the end user that information right away. Is there a minimum? It really depends on what you're doing. If you're trying to render, 3D CAD, obviously it's gonna use more bandwidth because you're gonna want higher frames per second. Like if you're trying to get 60 frames per second, you need more bandwidth. Right. But if you're just doing your general, office applications, it's much less. And for example, I was doing a .next in Copenhagen, and I was connecting back to my frame session in California, and it was great for the general session. But then when I wanted to do my 3D AutoCAD rendering, it was like, oh wait, this is a bad demo. The beauty about Nutanix is I was able to quickly deploy that same golden image into a data center in Frankfurt in AWS. And within a matter of minutes, I was able to spin that up, connect in, and get the actual experience I needed. And that, again, that's modern end user computing. That's a modernized VDI solution. And that's why I said Frame is different, because it gives you the capabilities to quickly pivot, to scale, to give you the session locality to the users. So back to bandwidth, it really depends. It really depends.
Yeah. And one thing I love about Frame, and I remember the first time I saw Frame and started using it, your cell phone bar, and I never thought about it that way, right? You see that the latency plus was a distance from distance from where you're running. So I think from here in Columbia, South Carolina, I think I was 150 miles as from distance from my from my Azure instance running in Frame. It gave me a little weird one when I was running Frame on-prem in my lab here at home. From a distance perspective, I thought that was kind of different, but I guess that's different story for another day. But again, to your point, it's very transparent. Performance, latency, everything is right there in front of the user to help them understand what's going on.
Yeah, and for anybody that's taking help desk tickets or support, it makes your life so much easier because end users have that information available. And they're used to modern technology. They're used to what their cell phones show them. So if they know how to respond to bad signal on their cell phone, they're going to be able to respond to bad signal on their Frame desktop.
It's a great way to put that.
Yeah. Work by a window, Cool. So it looks like we've covered everything as far as questions go. So we can go ahead and kind of wrap this one up today. Ed, thanks again for joining us from the Nutanix side. Appreciate your insight and hope to have you back in the near future here. Mike, pleasure as always. Thanks for bringing the customer experience. Like I said, on screen here, we've got Leanne Thomas. Look out for her follow-up. We're really welcoming any feedback that you have. If there are topics that you want to dig into further, We'd certainly love to get your input there. Over the next few sessions, we'll be talking about files next. In 2 weeks. We'll be diving back into core infrastructure shortly after that in about 4 weeks. And then 6 weeks out, we'll actually be talking about data protection and disaster recovery specifically. So if those are topics of interest, please check out the website and sign up for those. If there's other stuff that you want to check out, we've already covered security. We've covered VDI today, but there are so many things that we can talk on, like database, like microsegmentation. I mean, the list really goes on. So thanks to those of you that were able to join. Please do submit feedback when you get a chance, and we will we'll catch up with you next time. Thanks, everyone.
We have one question pop in.
Yep.
I think this one's easy. Legacy operating systems will support Frame. Server 2003, Windows 7. I'm gonna go on a limb and pretty quickly say no. Right? It's gonna be Windows 10, 2016, Server 2019. That's pretty much, I think, it from the Frame supported operating system, right?
Except for Linux, we have Linux as well.
Sure.
Yep. So, but absolutely, yeah.
Cool. Well, good buzzer beater question. Again, look out for that follow-up from Leanne. Feel free to submit more questions her way when you see that, and we'll be happy to help. So, Ed, Mike, thanks again, and thanks to those of you that were able to join us.
Yeah, guys, absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Appreciate it.